Ooh. Hello, YouTubers! My name's Willie. Welcome to my channel. Today I have comment request reaction video 108. And this is Arch Warhammer's take on the Lasgun. This has been requested by Brutality 616. So yeah, let's check it out. Play.
Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to yet more Warhammer 40k lore. Today, we're going to talk about the ubiquitous Lasgun. There are, of course, tons of variations of this weapon, but before we get into any of those, let's start with the basics.
Ooh, basics.
First and foremost,
I like
what
basics.
is a Lasgun? Well, it is the standard issue small arms for the Imperial Guardsmen. On some planets, they do issue other small arms, but it's very, 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 very rare. Essentially, for a regiment to be issued with anything but a Lasgun, it's going to have a very, very good reason to do so. Some, technically, Imperial Guard regiments that have been on extended garrison duty, for example, might be issued with locally produced gear instead of Lasguns. And we're talking about garrison duties that last into the hundreds, if not thousands of years, and eventually the regiment simply is not a priority for resupply of Lasguns and power packs, which might force the regiment to adopt locally produced weapons, like autoguns, for example. Now, if the regiment is then called back into active service, efforts will be made to resupply the regiment and bring them back up to current standards, but the administration of the Imperium being what it is, that is not always possible. It is avoided whenever possible because, well, the regiment is going to be a hell of a lot less useful in most cases, but still it does happen. There is, for example, one regiment that was mentioned in the Gaunt's Ghosts books. This regiment had essentially gone back to using so-called Laslocks, which are extremely simplified versions of Lasguns, using charged pellets to fire a single las shot before then needing to reload the weapon. These things are archaic, to say the absolute least. They're big, they're heavy, and they look pretty much like good old-fashioned 18th century muskets. Nice and heavy, and they're good for bashing people over the head with, but as ranged weapon, well, they do leave something to be desired. On the other hand, it is a hell of a lot easier and cheaper to produce, which means it could be produced on the local world, and the world, although it did have an active resistance force of sorts, they were essentially steppe nomad barbarians. The Guards regiment in question would essentially fight them by forming archaic square formations and fire at them in volleys using bayonets to keep the horses away. It worked perfectly fine as long as they were on the planet, but, well, sending them out into more modern warfare could prove slightly problematic. The good old-fashioned square formation is pretty damn useful against cavalry, but it does have some problems when it comes to repulsing tanks. And as for the weapon itself, it is the preferred weapon of the Imperial Guard because of a variety of factors, the most important of which is the relative ease of manufacture both of the weapon and its ammunition. The weapon itself is remarkably robust and is good for over 10,000 shots, with just simple cleanings and basic administration and a prayer or two. After 10,000 shots, the focus lens of the weapon needs to be replaced by a proper tech priest, but 10,000 rounds for a rifle is not bad. Additionally, the weapon has virtually nothing in the way of moving parts, which means that the weapon is incredibly reliable, it will practically never jam, and it's very, very hard to break. An Imperial Lasgun can be safely used as a club, with virtually no risk of actually breaking the weapon.
Wow.
Granted, the weapon is not particularly heavy, and as such, using it as a club might be somewhat detrimental, especially if you've got a nice old bayonet instead, but hey, some feral world regiments just don't like using sharp pointy objects. They prefer their weapons blunt and hefty. In fact, there's even an example of a feral world regiment that incorporated axe heads into the weapon's stock. Now, this was on the side that pointed downwards, made the weapon somewhat uncomfortable to use, surely, and it made it a hell of a lot heavier, but it was now essentially a functioning axe.
Nice.
I'm not entirely sure that this in any way really increased the capacity of the weapon, certainly decreased the range capacity, but on the other hand, it is now an axe that fires lasers, so you can't really argue.
At the same
And
time,
speaking of
moving
lasers,
the weight
the
back,
Imperial Lasgun is indeed a laser weapon.
increase the
It fires a
stability of the
highly
weapon.
focused, directed energy beam,
I don't know how much kick
which lasts
these
for
things
something along the
have.
lines of a tenth of a second. Once this impacts upon a target, it causes a rather catastrophic chain reaction. You see, the laser beam, naturally, is ridiculously hot. And when it strikes unprotected tissue, it will essentially vaporize said tissue. It will literally boil the blood in a nanosecond, causing a little bit of an explosion. It is a very effective weapon when it comes to unarmored personnel. In fact, just a basic las bolt will be able to blast someone's arm off. In addition to this, the weapon is extremely, quite literally pinpoint accurate, even at the maximum extent of its range. In fact, the only real limitation to a lasgun's range is the range at which the bolt is starting to dissipate in the planet's atmosphere. Basically, a las bolt, or any laser, can only travel so far before most of its heat energy dissipates into the world around it, so that is the only real range limitation. It doesn't have to worry about gravity or drop-off, although the effects of, the Earth's surrounding would still have an effect on it because it just goes in a straight line, which means that extreme range shooting can actually be pretty complicated if you're used to a ballistic weapon. Essentially, you might naturally be trying to compensate for a drop-off that no longer exists. Which is why, while most Imperial Guard regiments are of course levied from the PDF, they are then given extensive retraining. It would in fact not be an exaggeration to say that once a PDF unit is turned into an Imperial Guard unit, it is essentially retrained from the bottom up, as all of their old gear is now outdated. The old system of squad vox casters, for example, will be replaced by individual vox beads, and the weapons, as mentioned, are very, very different. The tactics also are in most cases very different. Most PDF units are expected to deal with no more than local civilian riots or hold fortifications at the worst case scenario, but even that, PDF units are generally speaking not expected to fight the enemy. If anything, they are expected to do nothing and die while doing so, if an enemy were so inconsiderate as to dump down on their particular doorstep. There is, however, one small problem. While the lasgun is extremely effective against unarmored targets, it does struggle with armor. Now, Imperial Standard Issue flak armor will provide a fair bit of protection against lasbolt. At the very least, it is likely to take the first hit, although after that the armor is literally going to be, destroyed, so you better not get hit again, but still, it's got a pretty good chance of saving your life the first time around. More advanced types of armor, like for example carapace armor, can take several hits, but again, this is relatively light Imperial Guard Standard Issue armor. It's not particularly tough. It'll stop a couple bullets, it'll stop a couple las blasts, but this is nowhere near the top-of-the-line protection that the Imperium has. Astartes power armor is virtually impervious to lasguns, unless it is at extreme close range. For a lasgun to have any real hope of penetrating Adeptus Astartes power armor, it has to be at virtually point-blank range. We're talking a couple of meters, and the weapon will have to be at the highest power setting possible. Additionally, it's probably going to have to hit a weak spot to guarantee penetration, and of course to guarantee killing what's inside. Even if the Astartes was not wearing power armor, a Lasbolt is unlikely to incapacitate a Space Marine. As such, you want to be aiming for the head in these cases. And then, of course, there's the fact that you are now trying to kill an Adeptus Astartes, or in this case, probably Chaos Marine, which is way worse, at something along the lines of 2 meters, while this monstrous creature is hurling towards you at something along the lines of 60 kilometers per hour. I mean, you can try for a headshot, but, I wouldn't fucking trust my luck. And neither would Imperial Guard Doctrine. Basic Imperial Doctrine for dealing with Adeptus Astartes is, well, calling on the Adeptus Astartes, or tanks, or artillery bombardment. But if an Imperial Guard squad is forced to take on a Chaos Marine, basically the idea is that the unit lines up, more or less in a straight line, or double ranks if they have the time, and all start firing simultaneously good old-fashioned volley fire. Basically, the idea is that even if the troops are in all due likelihood scared out of their fucking minds and therefore not aiming as well as they normally would, the hope is that a stray Lasbolt will hit something vital and hopefully kill the bastard. I wouldn't put money on it, but, well, it's better than nothing, isn't it? But of course, Chaos Space Marines are relatively rare, so it's not that big of an issue. Orcs, on the other hand, are not quite as rare, and they are quite resistant to Lasbolts. Now, first and foremost, Orc armor being essentially armor just because it's really, really thick, and Orcs are very strong and can lug an absolute goddamn ton of armor along on them, is pretty effective, just by sheer good old-fashioned thickness. The Lasbolt might carve out a nice fucking hole from a piece of slab metal, however, the piece of slab metal is still going to be in one piece in most cases, and it's probably going to take 2 or 3 more hits before the Lasbolt has, quite literally, dug its way through the armor. And after that, of course, you have the small problem of trying to put down an Orc with a Lasbolt. Now, Orcs are very, very tough, and they don't feel much in the way of pain, and their slab-like musculature is actually quite able to absorb a Lasbolt. Now, the Imperial Guard issue Lasgun will take down an Orc with a single headshot. With chest shots, you're probably looking at something along the lines of 4 or 5 hits before you start inflicting real damage. If all you've got is a las pistol, well, you're gonna need all the luck you can get, because only a headshot directly into the eye socket, thereby frying out the brute's brain, is really going to stand any chance of saving your ass.
Nice.
Luckily, however, the lasguns do come with a full auto option, which is very much so recommended once fighting orcs. You might have to expend something along the lines of a third to half of your magazine's ammunition to stop one, and at that point, you don't have time for individual shots. Tyranids can also be a fairly large problem. Now, the smaller gaunt variants are fairly easy to kill with a lasbolt, but the bigger ones can be nigh on impossible because they are protected by layer upon layer of natural armor. Again, much like good old-fashioned pieces of slab metal worn by orcs, a las weapon will essentially have to dig its way through these multiple layers on protection before getting to anything fleshy. And even then, you're probably going to have to dig your way through several layers of additional protection and muscle and other non-essential tissue before you can actually kill a big Tyranid, which means that a las rifle is virtually worthless against something like a Tyrant Guard or a Hive Tyranid. It will deal with the smaller bastards fairly easily, though, so again, it's not that big of an issue since Hive Tyrants are relatively rare, but if you see one, well, you're in for a fairly uncomfortable time unless you've got a heavy bolter at hand. However, this should not be considered a real drawback of the weapon. The simple fact is that anything short of a bolt gun would have a hard time dealing with these enemies, and unless you're an Adeptus Astartes, you're going to have a very hard time firing one without breaking most of the bones in your upper body, so that's kind of out of the picture. An autogun wouldn't really do all that much better. It might be slightly better at very, very long ranges, assuming you've got a high-powered weapon, something along the lines of a 50 caliber weapon or something, but again, it's not really going to benefit you that much in the long run, and as I've already said, A lasgun is fantastic
Although
against lightly armored
it's
infantry.
mentioned
Against regular
in
Chaos
Brax
cultists, or even blood pack troops, for
that
example, 1 or 2 hits
they
will
broke their
almost certainly
way
be enough to kill, and in fact,
into a
1
new
hit will almost certainly be enough to, at the very least,
barracks.
incapacitate the target and take him out of
Was,
action. And in all due honesty, the real advantage of the lasgun is not its killing
Kyborg
power,
and the
although
Ninth
a lasgun's killing power against
Ninth
unarmored and even
Company.
lightly armored human targets is
They
considerable.
ran out of
The
life for
true
their
advantage
charge
of the
packs,
lasgun comes in its
so
ammunition.
they started
The
using whatever
lasgun uses
guns,
power packs.
traditional weaponry.
These things are fantastically useful, and they are the primary strength of the lasgun. It might sound a bit odd to think that a weapon's primary advantage is its ammunition, but think about this. First and foremost,
Well,
these lasguns are
ammunition's
extremely
important.
compact. Your average guardsman can carry dozens of these things, and each of them packs something along the lines of 100 to 200 shots, depending on its size. There are variations in size. For example, the most common is the size 2, while other heavy regiments often use the size 4, which is tweaked in such a way that it doesn't provide any real additional ammunition, but it practically doubles the effectiveness of each individual lasbolt. This increase
Nice.
in power naturally plays absolute havoc with the weapon itself, and you can probably assume that it's only going to last something along the lines of 4 to 5,000 rather than the regular 10,000 shots, but the extra killing power is highly valued by regiments that are essentially expected to fulfill a stormtrooper role.
Yeah.
If you're going to be
Yeah.
storming into an enemy bunker complex with virtually no warning of when an enemy is going to be popping around a corner, you want that motherfucker to be dead in the first, not the second round. There is, however, relatively few varieties when it comes to power packs.
Stopping power.
You've got your standard size 1, which is used in las pistol, the standard size 2, which is the most common, used in Imperial Guard las guns, the size 3, which is used in highly specialized weapon. For example, the Legion Drop Troopers use size 3. It gives them extra ammunition per power pack for only a small increase in the overall size. This is very useful for drop troops because there's no guarantee that they're going to be resupplied on time if they're going to be resupplied at bloody all. As such, an additional 50 rounds per magazine is highly valued. And of course, the aforementioned size 4 that trades ammunition capacity and reliability for extra killing power. This all, of course, has the advantage of letting the Imperial Guard supply officer concentrate on requisitioning 1 or 2 types of ammunition. In fact, entire crusading forces will often be able to make do with only 2 types of power packs, which means that all Imperial Guard regiments can essentially draw their ammunition from the same stockpile. This means that no space is wasted, and it also means that ammunition can be sent to the regiments that are in the most need of it without having to dig out a specific pattern. In the worst case scenario, a larger expedition might have to supply 4 types of ammunition for specialized troops, which is pretty damn rare. An additional, and technically not entirely legal benefit, is that it allows many regiments to become virtually self-sufficient when it comes to ammunition. Imperial Guardsmen, being soldiers, will scrounge up any last piece of ammunition they can get their hands on, and hopefully they will not be using all of it, as generally speaking, if the soldier is fighting to the last las pack, he's in deep fucking shit, and has considerably more important things to worry about than whether or not he's going to have enough ammunition for the next engagement. This means that most regiments are going to slowly but surely build up a considerable surplus of ammunition. Now, in all due technicality, Imperial Guard quartermasters will usually request the return of ammunition so that they can keep their books nice and tidy, but, well, let's just say that some ammunition will be returned, and the rest of the power packs will unfortunately have been broken during the fierce fighting of the last few days, regardless of whether or not there's actually been any fighting recently. Luckily, the power pack is fairly easy to produce, and in fact, it is usually produced within the fleet itself. Even small expedition fleets will usually have one Adeptus Mechanicus fabrication vessel along with it, whose primary duty is to keep the unit supplied with replacement lasguns and power packs. Larger forces will have several such ships to make sure that the
Nice.
Imperial Guard troops are always well equipped with ammunition, and especially large troop movements, or even indeed crusades, will have specialized manufacturing ships that can create pretty much anything from heavy bolters to stubbers to tanks to ammo packs to lasguns to missiles to rockets to virtually anything. Generally speaking, however, the standard
Nice.
fabrication ship will produce basic ammunition, and the rest is expected to be ferried in unless there is a particular need for it. For example, artillery regiments will usually have a specialized manufacturing ship that produces all of their ammunition as well as any and all spare parts that may be required.
Nice.
It is, after all, fairly pointless and extremely wasteful to have to request spare parts from a planet that could be months, if not years away, not to mention completely and utterly impractical. You can't simply take a gun out of service for 6 months because it needs a new fucking gear. Additionally, you can't just carry along all of the replacements, because that shit weighs a lot, and it takes up a fuck ton of space as well. Whereas unprocessed metal, well, the weight is about the same, but the space requirements are vastly different. But that's still not all. In addition to being extremely versatile, easy to produce, and quite reliable, the power pack can also be recharged. Generally speaking, an Imperial Guardsman will be issued with something along the lines of 3 to 6 power packs at the beginning of a campaign, and those power packs are expected to last the Guardsman throughout the entirety of the fighting. Upon the conclusion of the campaign, the power packs will be handed over to the regimental supply officer, who will send them on to the Mechanicus, who will fix them up. As, of course, over the course of multiple recharges, the battery will slowly but surely start to lose some of its potency. And this is one of the few occasions in which you can trust an Imperial Guardsman to actually hand over his power pack. What basically happens is that an Imperial Guardsman will just happen to find an old power pack lying somewhere near his bunk, for example, that just happens to be pretty old and holds something along the lines of half its previous charge, and seeing as he just happened to find it after having accidentally lost it earlier, or no, he didn't lose it, someone else must have misplaced it, and out of the goodness of his heart, he has now come to the regimental quartermaster to hand over this long-lost power pack, as it must certainly be missing its family very much at this point in time. And speaking of recharging, they can be recharged by any real power source. For example, they have little solar panels on top of them, so they can simply just be put out in the sun and they will be recharged. And in an emergency, the power pack can be placed near to slightly inside of a fire. The power pack will be able to draw quite a lot of energy from this, although it is, of course, going to damage the power pack quite a bit. This is, obviously, a measure of last resort. The weapon can be recharged like this, but don't expect it to be holding the same amount of charges, nor the same amount of shots, and definitely don't expect to be able to do this too many times. Lastly, let's touch briefly upon one of the major modifications of the Lasgun. As I mentioned previously, there are a ton of legal and less legal modifications, and even quite a lot of differences within the patterns of the Lasgun, the most common being the M35 Galaxy, while you also have some crazy shit like the literally handcrafted las weapons of the Vostroyan Firstborn, but we are now talking about the general purpose weapons, and there is one modification of the weapon that can be considered general purpose, and that is the Imperial Longlass. As the name suggests, this is a sniper variant of the standard issue Lasgun. It uses specialized ammunition in the form of so-called hotshot packs that have a far smaller ammunition capacity, just 10 to 20 shots, but they deliver many times the energy. The increase in raw energy also, of course, means that the weapon's effective range is considerably lengthened, as it takes far longer for the bolt to lose all of its lethal force. To aid the wielder in long-range sniping, the weapon is also equipped with a high-powered scope, which is quite a rarity within the Imperial Guard. A basic lasgun will only really be equipped with something like a small scope or a reflex sight if it comes from a fairly advanced world, or if it is a regiment that is considered particularly important. Generally speaking, the standard issue Imperial Lasgun comes equipped with a good old-fashioned iron sight and very little else.
Yeah.
But that is not the only difference between a long las and a standard issue lasgun. It also comes with a few additional nifty mechanical nonsense pieces, and it is considerably longer than a basic las weapon. Specifically, the barrel is longer. The barrel can also easily be removed from the weapon by an unlock function. It can essentially just be screwed straight out. This is important because the weapon's increased power outage means that a basic barrel will only last something along the lines of 30 to 50 shots, depending on, of course, the rate of fire, the expertise of the wielder, etc., and any available coolant. You could potentially get a barrel up into as much as 60 shots with an available source of coolant, be it, for example, snow or something, but at that point, the barrel will be dangerously warped, and might just simply rupture, which is a bit of a problem. Due to the weapon's considerably higher power yield, it is also considered to be slightly more unstable than the basic las weapon. Now, it's still very unlikely that anything bad is going to happen to it, but hotshot packs do contain a far greater charge than normal power packs. As such, any malfunction is likely to be uncomfortable.
Catastrophic.
Again, it's not very likely to explode, but not very likely to explode and will not explode whatsoever is still a difference that is worth mentioning. Additionally, the weapon itself is considered to be extremely precious, and the Imperial Guard regiments put a lot of love and effort into their sniper detachment. Every single sniper has the rifle stock custom crafted to fit his body, for example, and it is considered a status symbol to be issued with a long las. In return, however, Imperial Guard regiments will tend to, expect quite a lot in return for their quote-unquote investment in their sniper rifles. Snipers are often requested to cover retreats of entire regiments, leaving them the last sons of bitches to try and get out of a hairy situation, and they are often also asked to do ridiculous things like, could you please wander over to that hill over yonder and see if you could kill the enemy commander for me, etc. And some Imperial Guard officers that coming from old-fashioned aristocratic worlds often consider the sniper rifle to be a bit of a boorish weapon, without any honour. You're not facing your enemy straight up in honourable combat, you're sneaking around the bushes, taking potshots at commanders and proper people, and this can lead to a rather uncomfortable life for the sniper.
Of course they think something
and simply
like that.
not having snipers is technically not allowed by the Administratum, although considering the, shall we say, turnover rate in regiments in which snipers are not welcome, they do tend to become rather scarce rather quickly. And so, that has been my video on the Imperial Guard Lasgun. I'm probably going to have to do one with some variations later on, some of the different patterns. Although most of the major patterns will be covered in Imperial Guard Regiment videos, for example the Elysian Drop Troopers, I will definitely be mentioning their specific pattern of lasgun, but there are some variants that are less common, and in fact, some which are downright illegal modifications, like for example the Shot Las, which is a triple-barreled lasgun, which essentially functions as a shotgun. It's pretty damn devastating at short range, but you're not going to be winning any sniping contests with it. So, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.
Okay, so that was Arch's Lasgun video. If you're not watching Arch, check out Arch's stuff to help you get there. There is a link in the description, so go check it out. Yeah, check out his stuff. It's pretty good. And this video has been requested by Brutality616, so thank you for requesting the video. Quite entertaining. My thoughts. So we talked about locks, and how they were muskets, las muskets, pretty primitive stuff. Benefits being the light, little moving parts, so relatively reliable and easy to make. Relatively easy to make. And the ammunition itself being easy to recharge and to refit. So, with the 4 different styles of clips, that's pretty cool. I talked about how it struggles with armor and hides, like the orc hides and the thicker hides of the Tyranids. Yeah, that's pretty neat stuff. Learning about this, it's a lot easier to implement it now when you watch other videos. You'll be thinking, oh, well, if they're using las guns, this is what that's capable of. That's pretty cool. And he ended talking about the prestigious, honorable, expensive, highly valued sniper version, long las. So that's pretty cool. I was always a big fan of the sniper quality, and but yeah, pretty neat stuff. Until next time, Willie, out.
If you like the video, stay tuned for more content. And as always, feel free to comment. Have a good one.